How are you guys doing? I'm Professor Arthur Murray, and today joining me, we have a special guest, a good friend of mine, one of my golf buddies, also a colleague of mine at KHOU. Worked together for many years, and we won't tell you guys how long and how old we are. However, without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Butch Alsandor, sports extraordinaire, just a outstanding guy, and has been in this business for quite a while. I won't put years on you, Butch. I'll let you do that. But joining me, guys, is Butch Alsandor. So, Butch, thanks for coming out today, man, and just spending some time with us, Texas Southern. And I know you have some ties here because of what you've done in the past. So let's go back and let's talk about you and who you are and where you are right now.
Well, first of all, Professor Murray, thank you very much for having me. Excuse me. Always a lot of fun to be here. Always a lot of fun to get out on the golf course and that kind of stuff. But I've been in Houston now for probably about 27 years. But I grew up in Louisiana. Some of you may be familiar with the town, a small town called Opelousas. That's where I grew up. Went to McNeese State on a football scholarship. And actually, truth be told, it wasn't always about radio and television for me or getting into that. I wanted to be a newspaper writer. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. But like a lot of kids coming out of high school who aren't really aware of a lot of circumstances, I signed a scholarship without checking to see whether or not the university had a print journalism curriculum. Wasn't very smart on my part. At all, because that's something you should check into ahead of time, But I went to a small school. We didn't have counselors. We didn't have, people to talk to about that kind of stuff. And I get there, and all of a sudden, there's no print journalism thing to get into. So there's this radio and TV thing, and I knew it was journalism. So I said, I'll try that for a couple of years and then see how it works out after that. So that's kind of how I got pushed in the TV direction.
Okay, so when you got to college and you play football, so let's talk about that for a second. You were on an athletic scholarship, and when you looked at the difference between, okay, I'm a sports guy, but can I really get into sports broadcasting? So talk about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that was kind of hard about it, because in my case, the coaches, I had a knee injury my sophomore year, so. After starting a few games my sophomore year, that was going to set me back. They actually wanted to redshirt me. But again, I didn't have the knowledge necessary or the maturity at that time. That's an honest assessment there. Didn't have the maturity to realize that they were trying to save me a year, get me another year where I can get healthy and get well. I was looking at it as, well, I'm on pace to graduate. I just want to graduate and get out of here, which was a bad move on my part, because then okay, I graduated, but then where do you go from there? I've spent all my time in radio and TV. I was fortunate. I got to do an internship the summer of after my junior year. Got to do an internship at the local TV station. Because it was such a small station, got to do a lot of hands-on stuff that really taught me a lot about all the different jobs at a TV station. I had no idea there were so many different jobs involved with it, because all you see are the people sitting down there reading the news or reading the sports. But there's so much more to it than that. And I was exposed to running audio for the morning show. I was exposed to going out and shooting for the sports guys in the afternoon. I did all the editing for the sports director at the time, because, he didn't have any help. It was a one-man band thing. And so I received a wealth of experience that really carried me on. And so when I go back to my senior year, I'd kind of been in the mix a little bit, kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. And, but this is where the problem came. All of a sudden now I'm graduating, because I didn't take that red shirt year, don't have a job, don't have anywhere to go. And that's something a lot of people experience. So what I would encourage everybody to do is do what I did. When you're in that situation, you have to use every asset you have at your ability to use to try to get your foot in the door, to do what you need to do. And I remembered that when I was my freshman and sophomore years, the coach we had went on to become president of the university. He had his doctorate and all this stuff. And the last 2 years, he was actually the president of the university. Well, he was the guy who recruited me. He was really good to me. I mean, we always had a great relationship for whatever reason. And so when he left, things were a little different for me. But I realized, well, I'm going to go talk to him. because he knows the owner of the TV station. So what I would kind of encourage all of your students to do is don't be shy. There's no such thing as being shy. Go out there, aggressively market yourself. Now, don't do it the way I did it, because I was so naive about things. Literally, I went up to the president's door, and the secretary, here I am in my flip-flops and my shorts and my T-shirt, said, "I'd like to talk to the president of the university." And she's like, "Are you crazy?" But the thing about it is, if you don't do that kind of stuff, you never know. She gets on the phone. She tells the Dr. Dolan, "I got this kid out here. He says he knows you. His name is Alsandor." She couldn't even say my name or whatever. He said, he threw the door open. He comes running out. I mean, it was just great. He says, "Come on in. What are you doing here?" So what I'm saying is, you just never know what door is going to do it for you. Who's going to get you through that door? And he did it for me while I was sitting in the office. He called the owner of the station. He says, "I have one of my guys here. He's a good guy. He's graduating. He's in radio and television." He found out that I'd done the internship there. I didn't have a specific job when they brought me in, when they finally hired me. Did not have a specific job. But at that point, as you well know yourself, you have to do anything. And I ran in, and I ran a typical day for me back then would be running audio for the morning show, going over at noon, maybe doing a couple of shots, videographer for the newscast, and then editing sports for that night. So you just have to jump in, all in, and do what you need to do to finally try to force yourself to get a break.
So talk about that once again. The importance of an internship is invaluable, correct?
It is. I mean, that is the best thing I think you could do for yourself, because especially if you're in a place where you can get some of that hands-on experience. I realize the bigger station you go to, it's going to be limited, but still, that's still very important, because you are there and you're seeing exactly how the sausage is being made. You know what they're putting into that gumbo. You can see the whole thing. And that's a huge advantage compared to someone who has no experience. The other thing, while you're there as an intern, you can put together your own tape. You can do that by going out with these guys and doing stories. And even though you're not doing anything hands-on, all the photographers, and that's the thing about this business, most people are willing to work with you. Most people understand what it takes to reach the level of a Houston, Texas, which is a top 10 market. They know it's difficult. So you could be an intern at, let's say, KHOU or KTRK or whatever, and you could just be going around with reporters doing stories and stuff, and photographers will bend over backwards to help you out. They'll shoot a stand-up for the report. If you want to get a stand-up shot, they'd be glad to do it. That's the vital part. You could take some of that other video, write your own story, and edit your own story. I mean, it can help you build your tape, and it's a way to do it without actually having that first job, which is the most difficult thing to get. It is extremely difficult. Right. And I might ought to add, Art, while you have to have some luck too, because I had some luck along the way. There was an anchor, still a friend of mine today. She's the main anchor at KPLC in Lake Charles, and just a great lady. And she had an agent when I became sports director there. And her agent saw me on one of her tapes, and she goes, "Does he have representation?" And of course, I told her no, and I won't have any if I have to pay any money, because I don't have any money. I'm flat broke. Right. And so she called me up, and she's like, "No, don't worry." But she was great. I couldn't have had a better person. I mean, at the time she was an older lady, and she was like, "Honey, don't you worry about that. You don't pay me anything until I get you a job." And so, I'm like, okay, whatever you want. Never really thinking that this would pay off into anything. Right. And before I knew it, in about a couple of weeks, she said, "This week I have you going to Baltimore for this interview, and then we're going to come back and we're going to be going to Alabama on Friday." And I said, "Well, you forget about Alabama, because I'm not going. That's just my personal preference. Right. I wasn't going to Alabama." I'm just being honest.
In those days, Alabama, no.
Yeah. And so I go up to Baltimore, never thinking that I'm going to take the job at all. Just thinking it's a nice trip, good experience, learning how to interview, learning how to do that. I grew up in the South. I grew up in Louisiana and never really been anywhere. But I get there, and then we go through everything. And when I get ready to leave, the news director tells the sports director, this is my guy. Excuse me, the sports director told the news director, this is my guy. Now you find a way to pay him, and we need to get him up here. So, but I won't throw this just while we're talking about that. This is how I got the job. I get up there. My agent didn't tell me that I'd have to do an audition tape in their studio. Because stations, especially when you're talking about that size, I was going from 172 to 22, 21 at the time, whatever. Well, I mean, it was, it's a huge jump. Mm-hmm. And so the things that she thought I was aware of, I wasn't. So I get there, and I'm sitting in the studio, in the news director's office. We go to the studio. He said, by the way, they're getting ready for your audition. As soon as the guy finishes the 6 o'clock news, you'll go on and you'll do the same sportscast that he just did. So, I'm like, oh, whoa. The wheels start to turn. But he said, no, don't worry about it. We'll give you a little time to write some of your own stuff. It'll be cool. So I'm sitting down there watching what he's running, and, I'm pretty cool with it. There was nothing that I wasn't familiar with, just typical stuff. I followed sports everywhere, so I was very familiar with everything, even though it was what he ran was Washington-based and all. I was still familiar with the colleges, familiar with the, I think it was the Bullets at the time. So anyway, they come up to me afterwards because it's a union shop, and they said, we're so sorry you're not going to be able to do the audition because we have weather warnings. We have a thunderstorm warning coming in, and we have to let the crew off because that's part of the union deal. They have to take their break now because they're going to be here for the rest of the night. So it's not fair to you. We don't have time to let you go ahead and write this up and do it. And Arthur, I told him, I said, oh, I'll do it. No big. He goes, I'll do it right now. And he's like, well, really, that's not fair to you, Butch. Are you serious? You really want? So yeah, I'll do it. I had already seen it. Right. I knew that I was familiar with the material. Right. So literally all I did was, which is a good key to everybody else, I wasn't even worried about reading the prompter so much as I kind of did my own little intros in my head and just rocked. And they liked that aspect of it, that it was such an ad lib, so like I'm talking to you type thing. I really think that's what sold it. Right. And then the fact that I would just jump in there and do it, I think that's what got me the job, really.
Well, that's very important, Butch, because being prepared, knowing sports, and if you haven't played the game, at least you know it. And that's something that goes a long way. A friend of mine, Ian Page, he worked with
I know Ian, yes.
Yeah, I know Ian. Ian worked with me in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. It was crazy strange for him because he came from New York area as a corporate attorney, and he came down to Mississippi, Jackson. And so we had to teach him everything. He didn't know anything about the broadcast business, but he knew sports because he played at Boston. He knew sports. And that's what I told him. I said, you have to rely upon what you know. You know sports. Forget about everything else. Forget about the cameras. Forget about the lights. Forget about all the pressure. You just go up there and pretend that you're talking to me or talking to one of your friends about the game. And when he got that, the light bulb went off, and he went, oh, I got it. And from that point on, this guy just did a great job. So, knowing the sports that you're talking about, it really helps, correct?
Oh, that is so true. And also just the fact that you were able to step up and give him some confidence. I can tell you something else. I just mentioned that I went from 172 to 22 or whatever, which is meant that I was completely over my head when I got there, because some of the things I was going to get to do in Baltimore, I'd never dreamed of doing in Lake Charles, right, because the two stations just didn't have the capabilities at that time. But the first story I did was very similar to what you just said. My first story was I was assigned to do 4 live hits, 4 live shots during our hour-long 5 o'clock show. They put me on Ted Turner's yacht in the Patapsco River. And so I was supposed to be like part of the crew. They had me doing these separate things where I was going to be doing a little crewing here, a little crewing there. And they'd come to me 4 times during the newscast. Well, I think part of our crew, it was a 3-man crew, someone who was pointing the satellite up at hit the tower. And we had a camera guy and somebody else doing something else. And I think the camera guy noticed something in my eyes, and he walked up to me and he said, and he just kind of whispered to me, he said, let me tell you, just do your thing. We got all this other stuff. You see all this other stuff, the satellite, the feed, the words are getting on time. Let us worry about that. Do your thing. You concentrate on and from that, I tell you what, that is something that has stuck with me throughout my entire career, and it works. Don't you worry about all those external things going around you. That's why I went to all those Super Bowls. You can go to whatever it was, 8, 9, 10 Super Bowls.
Right.
We were all standing up there side by side doing live shots at the same time. You would think, oh my God, how do they do that? I mean, that, you know, because you can hear the other guy talking right next to you. Well, it's just you train yourself to concentrate on your business. Let other people do their jobs. I mean, it's a hard thing to do because a lot of people like to control everything, and you want to make sure everything's going well. And you have to let them do their jobs, and you concentrate on your business.
Right.
And that's what has worked extremely well for me. And it's just like what you tell Ian. It's the same thing that happened to me, and it's something that I've carried throughout my entire career.
Perfect. So Butch, let's just put it in perspective. Young students coming out of college, young students that are in college, okay? And we're gonna talk some more about it because we have another 30 minutes to go here, I think. But young students coming out, this is one thing I want our sports students to recognize. We have a lot of students that actually play sports, so they're kind of like you. I have soccer, they're volleyball, they're playing in those different sports, but they are also RTF majors or they're sports information majors. But they all come to me and say, Professor Murray, I want to do sports. I don't want to do journalism, but we don't have that emphasis here in sports. But I want to do sports. And so what I told them is, look, do a podcast with all the technology we have today. Do something that's current right now to where you can get your skills built up. If you can't get an intern right now, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, you can't get an internship, what advice would you give to students right now to start working on? If they're a freshman, if they're a sophomore, if they're a junior, before they get the internship and even during the internship, what kind of advice would you give them?
See, a lot of students are actually doing what they need to do right now. And I will say this, because of all the evils that social media presents, there's a lot of good things too. And when I say there's a lot of good things, you look at what a lot of people are doing now, and you have your own platform right there. I use my social media accounts now basically to market what I am doing. And it kind of gets me speaking engagements in the area. It gets me more gigs. I mean, it puts more things. But all the students right now, they're all doing their own social. You're your own marketing manager in a way to speak of. And so you can, you can use this as a way to practice. And what I mean by that is you could be at some event. You could do something for a family. You could just pop on your little thing and talk live for 2 minutes and just kind of go on out there and kind of go through the motions and really just practice in a lot of ways. I mean, and you can, with the beauty of it is not only do you hear yourself, like back in the old days, all we could do was hear each other, but you can also see yourself. Right. And you could actually take that to somebody and say, well, help me. This is what I'm trying to do. But the other aspect of it is, too, even though you want to do sports, do not completely leave out that news element to it as far as, and what I'm saying by that is I kind of built myself up through that aspect of it, of learning the process of what it takes to be a news person. For example, I came from a little town in Louisiana. I had I still have an accent, but I used to have a huge Louisiana accent. I felt like if I were going to get to where I wanted to go, if I wanted to do the job I wanted to do, I had to work on that. I felt like I had to work on pronouncing the real, you got that thick accent, there are words you can't say. You have to work. I'd be in the car by myself, practicing on how to pronounce words, what are the right way to pronounce words, and doing those things. So just the basic aspect of what goes along with any journalism works in sports. They kind of go hand in hand. So I wouldn't let that go altogether, because you can do a lot of stuff to train yourself, to prepare yourself for that kind of, even in college. After I did the internship, we didn't have a studio per se. We had this makeshift thing, but I would spend time in there, and the professor was more than willing to spend time with me to try to get there. And you guys, I wish I had a tape. You can't imagine how bad I was. So, I mean, the best way I can say this is if I can do this, you guys can do this too, because I can't even express to you how bad it was. It was horrible. I mean, I used to cringe. I couldn't look at it. I remember being in a restaurant one night, and some guy, comes up to me. This is when I was still in Lake Charles, and he looks at me, and he probably had one or two too many.
Right.
And he says, you're that sports guy, aren't you? And I'm like, yes, sir. And he goes, I know you're trying to say something, but I don't know what the hell you're trying to say. And I said, well, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate that. Catch you later. Now, I'm sure he was, but, you don't take it like, you don't walk around and wear your feelings on your sleeve, but you do see where you can improve on things. And that's what I feel like it is. It's constantly trying to improve. I did a football game on Saturday night, and I come back and I won't watch it right away because I'm too critical of myself. If I look at it right after the game, I'm like, why'd you do this? Why did you do this? How did this happen? But at some point, I will go back and I will evaluate that you should have done this here, you should have done that there. So the way I look at it, you're constantly working to improve your craft.
Right. Man, you said a lot, Butch. One of the things that I tell my students every day in class, and journalism, RTF, is, learn the story. Whenever you talk to people, you want to know the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. And so how does that relate to sports? Because you mentioned that they should not leave the news concept.
Yeah.
And that's basic storytelling, but even in sports, you always got a who, the what, when, the where, and the how. So how would you relate that philosophy of storytelling to sports?
Well, and I would start by doing it this way. When I first left Channel 11, I was talking to a lot of people about doing a lot of things, and then I ended up, staying in the sports industry because that's what I knew, and But one of the people I talked to was Ambassador Karen Hughes, a friend of mine. She worked in the W. Bush administration. She was one of his advisors. She was an ambassador now. And one of the things she told me that was, and this is what I'm talking about always learning. She started out in television in Austin. And one of the things she said was, as a reporter, you have a specific set of skills that nobody else has. And I wasn't sure what she was talking about. And she's like, here's what I mean. You go out and you do a story. This is what you do when you go out and do a story. You become an expert on whatever it is you're doing a story on. You literally find out everything you have to find out about that subject matter, whatever it is, and you become an expert on that subject matter. She goes, what did you think when I got this job as an advisor that I know about foreign policy? She goes, but you make yourself an expert. You have the research, you go over the research, and that becomes where you go back to those basic reporter skills, the who, what, when, where, how type stuff. You answer all those questions, even if it's sports. There's no difference between sports and news because you are telling a story, and you have to get there. But you have to remember, too, it is a set of, if you can do that job, then you can branch off into a lot of different areas because you do have skills that a lot of other jobs don't have. You have those interpersonal skills where you interact with people in a certain way. You learn how to tell a story. You gather the facts. Anything you do, you want to know, you're talking about an event, you have to say when it's going to happen, what time it's going to happen, what is it going to benefit, what's the reason this is going on. So those are huge things, and that's why I can't stress enough, do not leave that behind. Right. Now, whatever way you work this into your stories, that's your own unique style. And that's another aspect we can talk a lot about because for a long time I had no style. And at some point in my career, maybe when I was in Baltimore, I guess, I started realizing I can borrow from other people. And if I saw things that other people were doing that I liked, and here's the thing, though, the key to that is you have to make sure you are taking what fits you. And you can't be somebody else. And I'm not telling anybody to be somebody else. But you can have people you like, and there's certain aspect of their broadcast that you like, and there's certain way that you like the way they do this or do that. And you can, and we had our sports director when I was in Baltimore, he was an old school guy. I mean, when I was there, he was 65 years old. So, he was up there. So he didn't even like the teleprompter. He just made notes on little index cards, and he brought his little index cards out there, and he just talked. And there was something about that was appealing to me. Anytime he sat there, he was truly talking to the viewer when he was looking at the camera, opposed to somebody who's trying to read every word that goes by. And there's just a lack of connection there. and to me, that's the biggest key when you're doing live stuff. You have to have that personal connection with the person sitting at home. They have to be able to identify with you, and they have to be able to like you too. You have to project some type of likability. You have to find something and that's why I say you have to be yourself, because that's what's going to make you be the most comfortable.
A lot of sports enthusiasts, or I guess I would say wannabe sportscasters, they all look at ESPN as their model. And, talking to our students, we have to tell them, once again, be yourself, find your own identity. But they watch ESPN, and a lot of them are too young really to know who Stuart Scott was. But,
yeah.
But they do. They go back and watch the old tapes. But everyone you see in the industry now kind of has a little bit of Stuart Scott in them. When you watch Stephen A., he kind of has a little Stuart Scott in him. He is very opinionated. But I always tell the students, let's not beat Stuart Scott. Stuart Scott is Stuart Scott. But Stuart Scott wasn't always Stuart Scott. He had to do exactly what you're talking about. He had to come in, learn the game, start in a smaller market, work his way up. And when he got to a point where he could be Stuart Scott, he let it go. And just so happened someone liked what he did. So can you talk about that for a second?
Well, it resonated. I mean, it revolutionized what was then sportscasting at this time. And I agree with you. It is, he changed it for the better, because he added even a bigger element of fun to the whole thing. I mean, sports was always supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be out there enjoying it. You're supposed to be having fun. I mean, you're getting paid to talk about sports. It's supposed to be fun. And Stu just took it to a different level. I mean, he took it to a level that so many people could relate to, where they weren't necessarily relating, excuse me, to the person sitting there just reading off scores and just kind of going like, rah, rah, rah. I mean, Stu took it to the streets a little bit. I mean, he did a great, I'm serious. It was his own style, though. It was him. And I think it wouldn't work for everybody to go in there and say, okay, I'm going to be Stuart Scott. But there's aspects of what Stuart Scott is doing that you might can incorporate into who you are. And you're right. He wasn't always like that, but he found his niche. And that's what it takes. It takes time. You get experience. You can't jump into any job and just be 100% and do, be the best. And some people can. I mean, you see some athletes come in, and it's different for everybody. But usually there's a maturing process that has to happen. And there's also an experience process. The more experience you get, the better you get. The better off you get. And the one thing I would suggest to any of your students who are listening to this is, don't be afraid to change. There's no formula, outside of the basics, what Professor Murray was talking about earlier, the who, what, when, where, how stuff. That's just fundamental. But outside of that, I mean, there's no set rule that you got to do everything this way. Have some fun, take some chances with that. And sometimes you're going to find out it works out. Sometimes it's not going to work out, but that's not the end of the world. You go out there and you take your shot at it.
Let's talk about some of the fun you've had, since you mentioned fun. Let's think about, let's take you back, Butch. Super Bowl. What was your first Super Bowl?
My first Super Bowl was actually right before I left Louisiana. It was the Patriots and the Bears, and they were playing in the Superdome. And then, of course, the Bears was the Walter Payton Bears and the refrigerator and all that thing. So
that 85?
That was, yes, I think it was. Okay. I think it was. But that one, stands out because it was the first one you go to. But there's so many. I remember the Buffalo Bills and the Redskins. Was it Buffalo Bills and the Redskins? And this was around 92, maybe. That kind of stands out. So sorry about the dates, but I'm gonna think. But it was in Minneapolis. And so that provided some challenges of its own, because, you had how many feet of snow out there, and we were doing live reports on the roof. And so we're out there in sub-zero conditions like that. So that was kind of cool. There was a lot of things that went on with that one. I remember going back to New Orleans again. One of my favorites was actually in Miami for the Chargers and the 49ers. And, of course, the game was a blowout. But a good friend of mine from Louisiana was a huge sports fan. We've been friends for years and years. And so I told him kind of as a present, I said, hey, look, if you come to the game, I'll get you set up with your credentials and stuff, and you can stay in my room, and then you can be on your own all week long, and you can go to all the parties and stuff. And so he had a blast. And so watching him kind of go through all that, I really, that's one of my favorites. And I remember I sat out in my seat for the first quarter, and then I let him sit out there for the next three quarters. And so there's just so many things. I remember covering the Rockets championships. Right. That may have been the most fun thing ever. I mean, all the stories that went along with that, watching guys like Vernon Maxwell fly in the four other guys who started on his high school basketball team because he wanted them to experience that with him. Being in New York for the Knicks and the Rockets during the OJ chase, being at Madison Square Garden. I mean, that was crazy.
I remember you guys telling me that story. Talk about that story a little bit. George Jensen told me that story.
Yeah, it was just absolutely surreal. And I remember in New York being in my hotel room watching CNN when I saw that Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered. And seeing that and not even thinking that this was going to intersect the basketball, I'm just thinking what a tragedy this is. And then we go to the game. I think it was a Wednesday night, if I'm not mistaken, because it was a couple of days later because we were in New York the whole week. And so we go to the game, and instead of sitting out in my seat, I was in the press room because I could write, and it was just more comfortable there. And then the Bronco chase starts. And then, like, literally, there's a split screen between the NBA Finals, between the Rockets and the Knicks, and the slow-speed Bronco chase with O.J. Simpson. And it's surreal. And you're sitting in there, and I'm watching. I remember watching, like, John Kennedy Jr. and Daryl Hannah coming in because they were all coming, all this, it's New York, so you have all these celebrities, Spike Lee, all these guys. They're coming in to see it on TV in the press room so they can see the split screen of what's going on. It was just surreal. I mean, the whole aspect of it. And with all this going on, there was still a basketball game being played. So that was kind of one that you'll never forget.
Well, funny
I also went to London. I was going to say I also went to London with the Rockets too. So that was.
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What were you going to say? No, I'm just going to go ahead.
Well, I was going to say this. For a lot of the young students that are watching this, they probably don't remember the O.J. Simpson trial because they probably weren't even born yet. But for you guys, O.J. Simpson was Kobe Bryant, I guess, if you will, of the 70s, pretty much. I mean, everyone knew O.J. Simpson. I mean, if you mention that name, O.J. Simpson was it. I mean, he did everything. He did all the commercials. He started making movies. So it was a big deal. And for you to bump the Rockets game, the championship, and have it split screen, that's news and sports clashing together like no other time before. That was a really big deal.
Oh, it was. But OJ was one of those athletes that transcended sports. I mean, he went beyond sports. He was the first big pitch man. There were no athletes really doing a lot of the, you had Joe Namath way back then doing the pantyhose commercials and stuff like that. But OJ was the first black athlete to jump across that line, and he's hurdling people in airports, doing Hertz commercials, carrying his suitcases and all this. So, I mean, OJ was up there. It was just, I wouldn't say like Tiger Woods, because Tiger Woods is internationally known. He's known everywhere. But OJ was the first big star to be. So it was huge. It was absolutely huge.
Right.
And it's something I'll never forget. I'll tell you that.
All right. So you're talking about Rockets in London.
Yeah. And that was, again, it's after they won the championship, I guess it was 95, and they won in 95, no, 94 and 95. I think we went after 95, but I could be wrong. But anyway, we got to go there for like about 7 or 8 days. And that was pretty cool just because we got to go through, all the stories we did were at all these historic places in London. And the best thing about it was because we were with the team, there was no lines. If you go there as an individual, you kind of have to wait around. But it was always funny to find those little nuggets in the thing, because a trip like that you think would be great. But I remember one story we did And I'll never forget the Rockets had this forward. His name was Chucky Brown, and Chucky ended up playing an integral part of them winning the championship. I just remember Charles Barkley at the time. He was with Phoenix. Chucky Brown was credited with doing a great job on Charles Barkley. And, Charles just got tired of hearing him one time, and he just said, basically, y'all keep talking to me about Blank and Chucky Brown. He said, let me tell you something. It's that big number 34 I'm worried about coming across the lane. I could care less about Chucky Brown. I got to worry about 34 coming in there. But we go there, and, of course, at that time, the European basketball wasn't at the level it is today. Not even close. Not even close. The Rockets were gods. I mean, people were just like, they weren't even going to play any of their starters, really. I can't remember. I'm sure Kenny played or somebody out, but I don't remember any of their starters really playing. And they knew they weren't going to lose. They were going to win. But to watch the people react to them and their the size difference, but they knew Elijah Wan. They knew all these guys. They were so pumped up about seeing the Rockets. And we got to go to all these places, but I do remember Chucky Brown. Back to that, one part of it, and I said, well, Chucky's telling me about all the stuff they've been doing and what a great time they had. And I said, well, Chucky, is there anything that you didn't like about this whole, experience? And he looks around and makes sure nobody's looking, and he leans in close. The food wasn't really that good. I had to this. So I thought it was pretty funny, but the whole trip was just, and I was with a good friend of yours too on this, Tony Delgado and it just to let you students know, we're talking about the fun aspect of it. The not so much fun aspect of it was just Tony and I, whereas all the other stations from Houston sent two crews, which meant we had to work all the way through. I mean, which was, but that's what you do when you go on the road. I mean, that's what you do. So, we enjoyed that, but there wasn't really a lot of downtime for us to be like, okay, we're going to go sightseeing on our own and that kind of thing. Because where the other stations were doing this in shifts, basically Tony and I were cranking out all of our stuff at one time. So, but that's the beauty of it, I think, when you get in this game and you do your own thing. What other job can you do where you know what you need to do and you can go out there and do your job without having somebody really breathing down your neck? Right. And there was nobody breathing down your neck unless you don't do your job, unless there's something that you're not doing right. But you know what you're supposed to do. You go out and you do it well. I mean, you're basically, working your own deal, and that's beautiful.
I always say that. We don't have a job. We have a career. Yeah. And there's a big difference. A job could mean, you're working at the grocery store, you're working at Walmart, you're working at, all the good jobs, you're working at the factory, all the great jobs, people make a living doing that. But, working on an assembly line. But in this business, what other business can you go out and meet all these great people, interact with all these great folks, travel the world? I mean, you've been across the world. I've been across the world several times, not only once or twice, but several times. And just covering the news and covering sports. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I try to tell my students, what I've done. And every time I bring up going to China with the Rockets, I think that was in 2004 with Sherman Chow and I. Yeah. And every time I bring that up, they just go, wow, that was, yeah, but we did that all the time. You went to London, and we
went to London, Canada, Mexico City,
right, I mean, we used to cover KHOU covered a lot of different things. So let me say this, or let me ask you this question: you've been in Houston for a lot of the very important sports times, I guess. You went from the I'm not going to say the Colt 45s, but
yeah. Well, the Astros. I got here in 92, 93. I got
right. So you got the Astros, and then then the Rockets. You got here right when the Rockets started. Just kicking everybody out, just out of the place, man. Just out of the. I mean, those guys were 94, 95 were great years for the Rockets and for Houston. Then you had the Astros. They had a pretty good time in '86, but fast forward, man, they won the World Series. It was like, wow, So how did that feel? I mean, you watched the Astros and even the Texans, at that time were called the Oilers. So you went from the Oilers transition, and then we went without football for a long time. So when that when the Astros won the All-Star, the World Series, what did you think at that time? You say, man, I've been there for everything.
Oh yeah, and it made me think a lot about the one where they played the White Sox. You know what? You know, not to digress a little bit here, but you just reminded me of something I can't believe I forgot, and I'm going to throw it before I forget it again. But if I had, and I'll get right back to this, but if I had to pick one thing that was the best experience, you mentioned all these experiences that we've had, and they're incredible experiences. But the one experience that will always stand out to the top for me was going to the White House to interview Michelle Obama, the First Lady of the United States. And that was just like an incredible, incredible trip. I just can't begin to just get across what it was like. I remember studying the night before, going over all my notes, because basically I was focusing in on her Let's Move program to get kids moving and eating healthy food and eating the right way and doing that kind of stuff. And the funny story is that morning I'm in the room and I'm eating breakfast and I'm up early, because you're not going to be late going to the White House. You're doing all this stuff. And I get ready to go. And I go to brush my teeth, and I had a chipped tooth because I had a tooth that had been replaced. Apparently, doing breakfast, I bit on something, broke it off. So here I am going to the White House with a chipped tooth. So, I mean, any anxiety, that took it all away, because at this point, you're like, what the hell? You're just going to go in and do a great job. But we go, and she couldn't have been nicer. And during the conversation, we find out that we both share a birthday. We're both born on January 17th. And that was kind of cool. And so I was with Kyle Porter. And so Kyle and I are running to do our live shot afterwards to get to do the 5 o'clock show. And we made it. And of course, after getting stopped by Secret Service, because they had these lines drawn on the ground and you have to follow your color coordinated line. And if you deviated from that, you never saw the presence, but they were always around because they can show up in a hurry. And so we were trying to take a shortcut. And here comes all these Secret Service guys. Can we help you guys? Can we help you? So we go out there. But the best thing about the whole trip afterwards was one of her aides came out and said, look, guys, we realized that we were running late. It was kind of a rush thing. Would you like a tour of the West Wing? So Kyle and I, they took us back, and we got to see the Oval Office. We got to see a couple of the rooms where they meet with the the generals and stuff. What do you call it? Situation room. Sorry. Okay. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it was pretty cool. But when you look at all the, I feel so fortunate because I got here in '93, and you look at that Oilers, that was the end of the Warren Moon stretch. They were really good that year. I mean, they were really good. In fact, they led Kansas City. Kansas not but a big comeback by Joe Montana. They might have been playing in the Super Bowl that year. That's how good they were. You mentioned the Rockets winning in '94, '95. The Astros, even before they got to the World Series, they had started to be very good. I mean, I actually started to know my way around Atlanta. I spent so much time in Atlanta because they were always having to play the Braves in the first round of the playoffs. So, you had that going on. And like you said, then they progressed, got to the World Series, lost to the White Sox at 4 games, even though they could have won all 4 of those games. Those were close games. Yeah, and, Rice won the national championship in baseball. I mean, you think about, there's so much stuff that has gone on during that time. I mean, it's incredible. We thought we were going to get a hockey team. They sent George Jensen and myself up to Edmonton because Les Alexander was about to buy a hockey team. Mm-hmm. That never went through, the deal that never went through. So there's so much stuff. If I thought about it, I mean, if I could go on and on and on, I had just dotting down some of this stuff. It's incredible. I mean, it really is.
It is. That's the thing that I tell folks all the time. And I've enjoyed being in this business. And when I left KHOU, now 3 years ago in April, I have no regrets. It's like, man, I've done everything. I mean, I've been across the world. I've traveled. I've talked to presidents, many different presidents, and it was just a really great experience. And whether you're in sports or whether you're in news, and you mentioned Michelle Obama. Here it is. You're a sports guy, but then we send you to cover Michelle Obama. I mean, it was outstanding. And it was like Butch took his hat off, guys. He took his hat off from sports and jumped right in the news side.
Yeah.
And then here you go, the who, what, when, where. And the interviewing techniques from guys that do sports, by the way, is just unbelievable because you guys have the improv. You guys know how to go off the top of your head because you have to do it all the time. So
Well,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, you have to function in that arena so much. And you mentioned that, we had all these Final Fours also that came to Houston, all these things that we did. But when those things march in, when the Super Bowls come to town, the Final Fours, the All-Star games, all these events, we send our news people over to the arena where the games and stuff are going on. That's where the prompter goes. When the sports guy goes on the roof or when he goes outside or when he goes over here, it's all, you're rolling, baby. You got to look down at your stuff, and it's all, you sink or swim. There's no prompter there. There's no safety net. You either, you sink or swim with it, and so that's a big part of it. That's a huge part of it.
Right, you're right. And so, like I said, this has been a great conversation, Butch, and we have about another 5 minutes, but let me get back with you. Just wrapping everything up. What advice would you give these young students that are getting ready to graduate in the next in May or the fall or next spring, and they want to do sports? So once again, it's kind of full circle. What advice would you give them?
The first thing I would say is don't get discouraged. One, you're young, and if this is something you really want to do, you owe it to yourself to give it your best shot. But with that in mind, always have a backup plan. I mean, I always had something else in the back of my mind, but give it your best shot. Don't be afraid to give it your best shot. Don't be afraid to check out every possible lead you can check out, to seek out experience wherever you can find it. That's the main thing. And the other thing is making relationships in this business. I mean, Arthur, my wife she's constantly talking about how every place we go, talking about every city, there's somebody that knows me or connected or somebody that these relationships in the business are so important. And you never know what they can lead to. You have no idea what's going to open one door for you. You have no idea. For instance, when I left KHOU, like you, I really hadn't formulated a plan as to what exactly I wanted to do. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I got a phone call from Dr. Charles McClellan, who was the athletic director at Texas Southern at the time. And he said, hey, man, I'd love to have you come and do some play-by-play for some of our sports. And, years ago, I'd done play-by-play with the arena team here. When we had an arena team, I traveled with them and did that. And so, but that only came about is because Charles and I had a relationship from me going over and covering sports and different things at Texas Southern. And it's important to make those type of relationships at any point in your life. And that's just, a lot of it goes to just treating people the way you want to.
Oops. Did I lose you?
I'm sorry about that. We got cut off for just a second there.
Problem.
No, we're good. I think I was getting a phone call. I was just able to send it back to the... But yeah, no, make relationships in this building. Try to get in and do these internships whenever they present themselves, whatever you have to do. And I would say this, and this is something that's not a very popular thing, but I wouldn't be that focused on money or what I'm going to make at the beginning. Because I just say this at the beginning, the most important thing is to get your foot through the door. That's the most important thing. Get your foot through the door, and then anything can happen like that. Because years ago for me, when I went to talk to the president of the university, he did tell me, after we're walking out of his office, he did say, all this is just getting your foot in the door. It's up to you. The rest is up to you. You're going to have to make it happen. You're going to have to be able to improve enough to do all this stuff. And that's really how it is. But any opportunity you have to get some type of experience, to work with somebody that has experience, to get advice from someone who has done it. And there's no question that's a bad question. Ask any question you want, because I wish I would have asked more questions. I really do.
Right. And so Butch, where can we find you right now these days? Where are you? What are you doing these days, Butch?
Yeah, well, shoot, I've got. I was doing some filling in on AT&T Sportsnet on the Rockets and the Astros pre and post game shows, and then COVID hit. So who knows what's going to happen with that now? Because a lot of weren't really traveling to a lot of the games now. So we'll see how that's going to work out. I also do play-by-play and some color for the SWAC and for some Southland Conference games. And so that's a lot of fun. I've been because of COVID also, because the SWAC has moved their football games to the spring, I've gotten to do a lot of football this spring, so that's pretty good. I do basketball also during the fall, so I'm kind of keeping busy with that aspect of it. It just kind of keeps keeps you in the game a little bit, and it's the fun side of it, though. Really, it's the fun aspect of it.
Well, we caught you some games here, right? You did some TSU games last week.
Yeah, and I still
game coming up, right?
Last week I did Texas Southern and Southern at BBVA, and then Grambling. I think it's not this weekend, but next weekend. So no, I'm staying busy with that, and I've always Cynthia Cooper and I a couple of years ago, before she took the job as the head basketball coach, we did all the home basketball games on AT&T. So, that's a lot of fun too. And I still do some nonprofit stuff around the city, so that's kind of cool. And enjoying that aspect of it too. So, I'm kind of like you. I was listening to what you said about, don't really have any regrets at this point, because it's not something I sit around and say, boy, I wish I would have done this, this, or this. And then one other quick thing about, you were talking about these jobs, how it's not a job, and how I was thinking about all the jobs I had before television, and that'll give you a really idea, because I worked at a Hardee's, I worked with these crop dusters, I worked construction work, I worked at the port of Lake Charles, I did the setup for the Disney on Ice show. So when you think about all the crazy stuff you could be doing, just don't be afraid to do anything, because you have to do what you have to do. That's what it comes down to.
Right. Cutting grass, working on a roof.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing, man. And so the final advice that you're giving these students is going to be that, just don't be afraid. Get out there and try it. Try the business. And it's not going to work for everybody. I think there's going to be times when, folks graduate here and they want to go out in the business. They go, you know what, this is not for me.
Yeah, exactly. You take your shot at it, and you see, and it's not for everybody. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's an important thing we need to mention also, because you can get in it. Hey, look, first of all, you work every holiday. You work at night. You work. You're not with your family. You're missing birthdays. You're missing it. So there's a negative side to this too. It's not all positive. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really an important part of it, because that's just part of the business. I mean, that's what you have. There's no such thing as you shut down on holiday. You don't get off spring break. You don't. Those are things you have to consider too. And a lot of the hours are at night.
Right. Exactly. And that's, like I said, and that's, you have hurricanes, and it's funny story is, Matt Musil and you, and, whenever we get into these hurricane modes, all of a sudden you guys take your hat off from sports again, and you jump into hurricane mode or flood mode or.
Yeah, I did that one time. I was fortunate, because they put me with Tony Delgado, who's one of our most experienced photographers at the time, and so he would, if we would get a request that would be kind of like over the top, he'd go, "Come on, man." So he could kind of, whereas I probably would have been in some danger, because I would have tried to do whatever they told me to do, because that was not my case of but I remember one guy had suggested, well, can y'all go down by such and such a lake and put it, and he goes like, and where we're going to put our lights? We're not going to. So sometimes you have to be able to just incorporate a little common sense into all of this stuff. But the reporting is reporting, and that's what it is. Like I said, we talked about that earlier. You give out the basic facts, and it's the same thing. It is. But that's another aspect of it, where how long did we I had a hotel room in Clear Lake and a hotel room in downtown Houston, and we went back and forth from the two for about a week, because that was you do the hurricane, and then there's the recovery aspect to it. So I think there were people that were out longer than me, but I think I didn't get back home for 4 or 5 days, and there were people who were involved a lot longer than that. So
Right. Well, Butch, it's been really good, man, catching up. And to me, it sounds like we're just in the living room just talking right now because, there are a lot of stories. And when we get together and we play golf, we talk about a lot of stories. And, KHOU days are great. I love them. And, I love people that, we work with. And, you and I have always been talking, we always talk about, students. We always talk about giving back and helping others. And
Yeah.
so, and we do a lot of, a lot of different things working with one another. But it's been really nice having you, man. So, any final words before we go for our Communications Week 2021?
Well, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for everything you're doing over at TSU now, and what you're doing to the communications department over there, and basically for your students, for how lucky your students are to have a guy like you that I know who not only knows the right way to do things, but you care about them and you care about their future, and that's big, and I like to thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you, man. On behalf of our dean, Dean Raquel Brown, and our SOC department, man, we want to thank you for coming out and joining us for our 2021 Com Week, Texas Southern University. Thank you.